Okay.
So welcome, Shannon, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. As all of you know, this is our virtual Diwania from the US Embassy. Shannon, she's going to introduce us tonight to how to make jam and a lot of other stuff. She will give us some secrets even. So thank you very much, Shannon, for being with us tonight. And the kitchen is yours. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. So yes, I'm really excited to be here. This is one of my favorite hobbies, and it's kind of it's a lost art, also an art that is making a comeback. It's become very popular in recent years. It's become even more popular since 2020 because it's a fun hobby that you can do 100% at home, and you end up with really yummy things to eat at the end of it, which is always a plus.
Also, if you have trouble finding jam at the store.
Right, exactly. When you're at the store and you can't find the thing that you need, you can just make it yourself. Or once at the very beginning, I want to say back in March of 2020, my little ones were home from school and were eating far more sandwiches than they ever had before. We ran out of jam and I really didn't want to go to the grocery store and all of the craziness and nonsense. So I just made some. And it worked out really great. So
it was very yummy. My favorite of her entire jam is her strawberry jam. It's very yummy.
So this is my assistant chef, my daughter Abigail. And she's gonna help me out.
Hello, Abigail.
So the first thing that you're going to need to do for any jam recipe. Now today, we're going to be making a blueberry maple jam. And there are recipes out there for just about any flavor that you could buy on the grocery store shelf. I like to focus on making recipes that I can't buy at the store. If I just want a plain strawberry jam, I'm just going to go buy it at Tamimi. But if I want strawberry balsamic vinegar jam, or in this case, a blueberry jam that's sweetened with maple syrup instead of with plain sugar, I can make that myself. And it's so much more interesting than what you can on the shelf at the store. So what we're going to do is, the first thing we're going to do is start with our recipe. When you are making kind of jam, jelly, preserves, pickles, anytime you want to put food into a jar and have it sit on your shelf for weeks, months, up to a year, you need to make sure that you're using a recipe that has been properly tested. I'm going to talk a lot about safety, and the reason for that is because we are taking food that would normally spoil, it would normally go bad if you didn't freeze it or in the refrigerator, and we're going to make it so that it can sit on your shelf in your pantry for a year, and it's perfectly fine to open it and eat it a year after you put it into the jar. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that we have the correct acid level in the food to kill all of the bacteria that could potentially cause toxins and make you really, really sick. And so the only guaranteed way to make sure that your food is going to be safe is to use a recipe from a tested source. In this instance, we're going to use a recipe from a cookbook called Preserving by the Pint. It's a cookbook written by an author who has a series of cookbooks all about making jams and jellies. And she has a website called foodinjars.com. So I'm going to put that in the chat in just a foodinjars.com. And I'll talk about some other places where you can go to find tested recipes. But you always want to make sure that your recipe has been tested in a laboratory to make sure that it's safe. So we have our recipe. The first thing we're going to do is prepare our jars. Now what that means is you're going to take, Abby, can you hand me the lot of jars there? You're going to take your jars. You can get these at Sacco. They come usually by the case like this. They come in different sizes. This one is kind of your classic half pint jelly size. Today, what I'm actually going to be using is the 1/4 pint size. This is a really great size to give away as a gift. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your jars, you're going to wash them in hot soapy water, which I've already done. And then this is where I'm going to switch over to my second camera here so that you can all see what's going on my stove. I have my pot here. This is not a special pot. It's just a regular pot that you use to cook soup or whatever in stove. And in my pot, I have a silicone flour. Again, we just get these at Sacco. Folds up like that. Just looks like a little orange flower. That is the bottom of my pot. So as I do this, I'm going to kind of ask you guys sort of see if I can jump back and forth between.
Yeah, we can see the pot.
Yeah.
Shannon, we cannot hear you.
Okay.
Thank you, Princess. Thank you, Abby. Yes,
Okay,
now we can
all
hear
right.
you. Yes.
Technical 2 camera setup here. So in the bottom of our pot, I have my clean jars, and I just have them in pot almost close to boiling water. And the reason that I do
So
that
it's just
is,
boiling water, right?
yeah, just plain old boiling water. And the
Okay.
reason that I is so that when I go put the hot jam into the jar is hot, the jam is hot, nothing breaks. There's no temperature.
Okay.
Usually I explain this by talking about what would happen if you threw boiling water into snow, but I don't think a reference here.
There are snow here on the north,
Okay.
but people will understand.
Great. All right.
Please.
So actually you want your jam and you want your jar to be the same temperature when you put your jam in the jar. Leave that alone for a while we cook our jam. Just know that we've got our warming and ready to go. Now these jars.
So a question,
Yeah.
Shannon, please. Yeah. So this orange flower, what does it do exactly?
What it does is it keeps the jars sitting up off the bottom of the pot.
Okay.
So if you are really into this and you think this is a super fun thing, then you can order this pot. And in the giant pot is a big old metal rack. It's the same purpose. All it does is keep the jar off the bottom of the pot. And you do that so that the water can circulate all the way around the jar. You want the boiling water to go all the way around the jar when we're putting the seal on. Now that's going to happen at the end. But yeah, so.
Because it's hotter under,
So that's because we want the boiling water to be able to circulate all the way around the jars. So we just keep the jars off the bottom of the pot with this little.
So they can, right.
Flour. Like I said, I bought this one at Saks. So the other thing is that these jars, oh, here it is. Jars come with a special lid. It's 2 pieces. There's a ring, a lid.
A lid.
The
Okay.
lid has this seal, this little rubber seal here. It's not actually rubber, but it's close. That is what is going to seal the jar very end and make it safe.
Okay.
So
You can only use it.
yes, these are single use. If you buy a flour jars, they come with lids. You can reuse jars over and over.
As well as these.
Yeah, you can reuse
Okay.
the jars and the rings. You can then buy a separate box of just the lids.
Just the, okay.
So you take your lids and you put them. It's just a saucepan with simmering water in it. Like, I'm not even gonna get
And
out.
these.
You don't need.
Okay.
I'm not even gonna get out the other camera because it's a saucepan. There's a little bit of water in there. That's it.
Okay.
Now it's time for the fun part. Now that we've got our equipment all set up and ready to go, we're gonna actually cook the jam. So I have here, let's see, I can swap cameras here. So I have here this 680 grams of blueberries. These are for blueberries. You can get, I know you can get them at Danube. I think you can get them at Tamimi. It's just frozen blueberries. I
Frozen.
pulled these out of the freezer.
So, so they're frozen blueberries, not fresh.
You can use fresh.
Okay.
Way too expensive here.
Okay.
No reason to, like, if you're gonna pay for fresh blueberries here, eat them fresh. Don't
Okay.
turn them into jam.
Okay.
Use the frozen ones if you're gonna make jam.
Okay.
So, yeah, so this is 680 grams of frozen blueberries. I just pulled these out of the freezer this morning and let them thaw. You can do this when they're still frozen. It's just gonna take a little longer to cook because it's gonna have to come up to temperature.
Right.
So, Abby, you want to be my camera person here? Okay. So I'm going to dump my blueberries into my large, wide skillet here. And it's, again, there's nothing particularly special about this pot. It's just a large cook pot, wide and shallow. I'm going to turn the heat on there. And then in blueberries, I am going to add, this is 175 grams of brown sugar. An old 175 grams of brown sugar. We're going to dump that in here and get that all out the bottom of my bowl. And then I have pure maple syrup. This is not the stuff they call pancake syrup. This is actual maple syrup. I know you can get it at Danube. I think you can get it at Tamimi. And yeah, it is not going to work if you try to use the stuff called pancake syrup.
Yeah.
Not the same thing. And so this is going to be 120 milliliters of maple syrup. And pour that in here. And then this is where I start talking about Safety Girl again. So, this is bottled lemon juice.
Lemon.
Yeah, this is lemon juice, but this is the lemon juice that comes in a bottle. And again, like I said, you can get this at the grocery store. You want to use the lemon juice that comes from a bottle because it's the same level of acid, of sour throughout the bottle. Different lemons can be different levels of acid based on how rainy it was where they were grown and what variety they are, how big they are and how small they are. And because we're depending on this to make the recipe safe, we want it to be consistent. So
Okay.
we're going to use 2 tablespoons of the bottled lemon juice. And if you end up with a little bit more, it's not going to hurt anything. This recipe is going to make enough jam to fill 4 of the little jars or 2 of these big jars. You can always cut a jam recipe in half. You should never, ever try to double it. And it's because it will affect whether or not you end up with something that's spreadable on toast or a syrup that you have to pour over things.
Okay.
It's designed to cook for a certain amount of time and have a certain amount of liquid come out of it so that it turns into
Jam.
So now that we've gotten all these things together in the pan, Abby, you want to show pan here? I'm going to turn on my oven. Hopefully that'll make it a little. And I've just got some leftover dinner burning off on my burner here at the bottom. But all of this is dissolved, the syrup is dissolved into the juice. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mash
it.
my blueberries.
Okay.
And this is the part where it turns into jam. The difference between jam and jelly and preserves is
the actual fruit.
Preserves is either the whole fruit in the case of a berry or small pieces of the fruit if you're talking about like a peach or perhaps an apricot preserve. And that is big chunks of fruit in kind of suspended in a syrup.
Okay.
And jelly
Is the juice.
Exactly. Just the juice. So there's no chunks of
fruits.
actual whole fruit anywhere in a jelly.
Yeah.
And then a jam
Is
smashed fruit.
and also the
Yeah.
syrup.
Yeah. Jam is smashed fruit and the juice. Now, so at this point, I've kind of smashed up my berries. They're going to break up a little bit more as they cook.
So you don't use blender or it's just you smash them?
No, not for jam. You just kind of smash it up by hand.
Yeah.
There's another. So I talked about jams, I talked about jellies, I talked about preserves. There's another one called a fruit butter. For a fruit butter, you are going to use a blender because a fruit butter is a very smooth, consistent, thick textured fruit product. A fruit butter,
creamy.
Yes, it's very creamy, very smooth.
Takes about hours.
Yeah. And the difference is with a fruit butter, you're cooking the fruit over a really long period of time and removing as much liquid as you possibly
Okay.
to get that really smooth, spreadable texture. All right, so all I'm doing right now is I'm going to hold my camera. My assistant has taken off. I'm just letting this cook. I'm going to bring this up to a little boil. You can see where it's kind of started to bubble.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to stir it and I'm going to let it cook. It's far more simple than I think people realize. And this is it. I'm just stirring it and I'm letting it cook. Now, do you want to hold the camera for me so I can talk? All right. So just show the berries. Okay. So, a fruit to come up to what we were trying to do here is plain water boils at 100 degrees. This has sugar in it, natural sugar from the fruit, as well as the sugar from the maple syrup. So it is actually going to come up higher. It's going to come up to about 104. That is what we call the jam set temperature. To tell when your jam is done cooking, and it takes anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes to cook, depending on how juicy your fruit is, how much you stir it, and how humid it is inside your kitchen. All of those can affect how long it's going to take to cook, how wide your pan is. So the way you can tell that your jam is done, probably the most scientific way, the guaranteed way, would be to take the thermometers that we're all very familiar with now, the little gum thermometer they use.
Stick.
Now you don't even need to use the like a food thermometer. They point at your hand whenever you go to the store.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and just point it at your jam, and if it's reached 104, you're ready to go.
Okay.
Another way to do it, if you don't happen to have one of those handy, is you sort of look at how your fruit behaves when you're running your spatula through the pan. And you can see here, I can't see the bottom of my pan at all. I'm trying to sort of get around the steam from the bubbling fruit, but it's still very, very runny. Dragging my spatula through isn't really, you can see it's starting to come together a little bit. But the jam is very quickly running in to fill the space as I drag the spatula through. So it still has some time to cook. As it cooks, I want to keep stirring so I don't burn any of my fruit. And I'm going to turn off my video here for just a second. I want to keep stirring so I don't burn any of my fruit. And I want to just sort of keep an eye on it. This recipe is what we call small batch. As I said, we're just going to make 4 jars today. Kind of the historic practice of, we call this canning, even though we're putting foods into jars and not cans.
Not cans.
And I don't actually know why.
Not jarring, but canning. Okay.
They don't call it jarring, we call it canning. We're putting food into jars, not cans, and I'm not really sure why that's how it is. Kind of the historic practice would be, if you lived on a farm, you had a fruit orchard, and you had all of this produce, and you needed to preserve it for the winter. This is what you would do with a huge amount of your fruit. Before you had refrigeration, before you had freezers, you would spend all day in the kitchen with a massive pot of boiling fruit, and everybody in the family would help, and you would end up with
piles of
50, 100 jars of preserved fruit, jams and preserves and everything else to get you through the winter.
Right.
There are people who still do that. It's not exactly practical for the modern kitchen. And it's not exactly practical for what I think is the best use of this particular hobby. And that is, I bought this fruit. I bought these apricots. I bought these peaches. I ordered from Freshberry and they sent me way more than I actually asked. And it's bad. Like, it's going to spoil. We're not going to eat it in time. It's going to get spoiled. If you can make a small batch of jam or jelly, you don't waste that food. It doesn't take you all day. It's not a huge time commitment, but you're still able to use up all of that produce that might otherwise just sort of go bad in the bottom of the refrigerator.
Right. So Shannon,
now, yes.
Can we use the same recipe for different fruits, or each fruit has its own different measurements?
Different fruits have different measurements because different fruits have different levels of acid in them naturally. The resources that I will share are going to have just about, okay, so I've dropped my spatula into the jam and I'm now going to pull it out with a pair of tongs and grab a different one. Okay. If you cannot find a recipe for a particular fruit from a trusted source, it is possible that particular fruit is not safe for canning. For example, pumpkin cannot be turned into anything that you can make at home safely. It has to be done in a commercial facility that can bring things up to a much higher temperature, and it's a different process.
Okay.
I have looked everywhere for recipes that use dates.
Dates, yeah, for example, no.
And
Yeah.
I can't find any. And honestly, what I wonder is most of your resources for safe tested recipes are going to come from the United States and the United Kingdom. That's kind of where, you know, the hobby has really taken off in popularity. That's kind of historically where it was a common practice. And you can't get really awesome dates in the United States, like you can.
Not like here, right?
If it's just, there hasn't been a lot of call to develop safe recipes for them. But honestly, if you have really great dates, then you just as fast as you can get them anyway. And so you never have to worry about putting them into a jar. Okay, so we are now, I'm going to pick up this camera again so you can see. Wendy, can you come be my camera girl?
What do I need to do?
Just hold that. Okay, so you can, if you can kind of, just like that. See here that as I drag the spatula through the pan, the jam is, you can see the bottom of the pan.
So most of the water or the fluids are gone.
Yes.
Okay.
A lot of the water has now boiled out. It's thickened up, and you can see, you know, where it's, I can see the bottom of the pan as I drag my spatula through it. So this jam is ready to go into the jars. So what we're going to do is turn it off so we don't burn it. Give it a stir so we get a nice distribution of our fruit in each jar. Then I'm going to ask my little helper here to move out of the way real quick. I'm going to, I own this piece of equipment. It's called a jar lifter. I have not seen anyone here, anywhere here in Riyadh. You can order them online. Yeah, it's like literally, it's called a jar lifter, but you don't have to have one of these to do this. So I'm going to lift one of these jars out of the boiling water with my jar lifter, but I can, regular old barbecue tongs, I can do that to get my jar out of the boiling water. I can use different kind of set of tongs. You just need some way to get your jar out of that super hot water without burning yourself, and hopefully without dropping the jars.
Yeah.
So you got your hot jars sitting over here. And at this point, I'm going to turn my pot that my jars were in, I'm going to turn the heat up because I need this to come to a boil. I'm going to take all right, Wendy, can you come be my extra camera person here? Sort of trying to get a good shot of what I'm doing. So I've got my hot jars sitting right here. I have my spoon, just a spoon, and I'm going to spoon some blueberries and syrup into these jars. I'm going to make a big old mess while I'm doing it because I'm incapable of not making a big old mess while I do this, honestly. So I have, again, equipment that I have. It's nice to have. You don't have to have it. This is a canning funnel.
Okay.
It's a regular funnel. It has a wide opening on the end. I do that, I can stick that into my jar and kind of scoop my berries in the top over here and maybe make a little bit less of a big old mess. It's not necessary, it's nice to have. So, as I said, this recipe says it's going to make about 4 of these little jars. This is not usually a precise, sometimes it works out to be exactly what the recipe says it's going to work out to be, sometimes it doesn't. And again, that has to do with how much juice was in your fruit to begin with, how humid it is in your kitchen, how long you pour. There's a lot of different factors that can kind of go into that. So it looks like we're going to be just about perfect one, which is rare. And all I'm doing is I'm just putting the last of my fruit, smashed my hot cooked jam. You'll notice here that it is still very, very liquid. It does not resemble jam yet. As it cools, it will become significantly thicker. So I have just a little bit more than what the recipe said. Just a little bit.
A little bit more, okay.
When we have just a little bit, and this happens a lot, you just take your just a little bit. You always have an extra jar handy. You take your just a little bit, you put it into your extra jar. That jar goes straight into the refrigerator, okay? It is not going to be safe to put it on the shelf, but you can put it straight into your refrigerator and you can eat it just as you like over the next couple of days.
I might
So,
add.
so you guys are going to get some blueberry jam to eat tomorrow.
I would actually kind of like that for my lunch when I go to the school.
Okay.
So Shannon, the jar won't break because it's too hot and the jam is too hot and you put it in the fridge?
It will not. You're fine. It's I've never had it happen.
Okay.
It might put it into the freezer. That's a pretty huge shock. I've never had it happen putting it into the fridge.
Okay.
I suppose it could theoretically happen. Like I said, I've never had it happen.
Yeah.
So, all right, I have my other helper back here. So, we have our jelly in our jars. And it looks like I've got a little bit of too much in this one. So I'm going to scoop a little bit out and I'm going to put it over there just so that it's basically even. And I'm not coming all the way up to the top of the jar. Again, another tool, I have it, you don't have to have it. This is for measuring the amount of space left in the top of your jar. And so this is about fine. If you have any recipe that you look up will tell you how much space should be in the top of your jar. Okay. Any recipe. If you have too much space, it won't seal properly. Anytime you have a jar that doesn't seal properly, it's not a big deal. Just stick it in the fridge, eat it first. So I had my lids in this little pot of simmering water back here, no big deal. And before I do that, actually, again, to make sure I'm going to get a good seal, I'm just going to get a paper towel. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get and I'm just going to wipe the very edge, the top edge of these jars, just so that any jam that is right on this top edge where the lid is going to sit gets wiped off and it isn't sticky and it's not going to interfere with that rubber gasket getting a good seal there. So, again, nice tool to have, not a requirement. This is literally, it's a magnet on the end of a stick. That's all it is. It looks like, does somebody have a question?
Sana, she mentioned she tried a week ago, I think, to make one jar. Yeah, a week ago.
Yes, Shanna, I made one jam. It's berries. I have 3 trees berries in my home.
Oh,
I did it
jealous.
Home. Yes, it's a homemade. I think we can change ours, and you will taste mine, and then you will give me yours.
So all I'm doing is I'm lifting up these lids and I'm just setting them right on these jars. If you don't have this magnet on a stick, you can pick your lids up out of this simmering water with a fork. And I'm doing that right now, and you can just sort of see how I've like balanced the lid between the tines of the fork, just like that.
Yeah.
The reason that we had the jars, the lids in the simmer is to just slightly soften up that orange seal.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Hatim, for joining us. And we'll see you next week, inshallah. So Shannon, Mr. Hatim, he's leaving. He has to leave, but he said thank you and he enjoyed the session.
Oh, great. Wonderful. And I will follow up with kind of some, follow-up written instructions if it's, something you want to go back and try.
Thank you. We can post it on the YouTube too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got our jar lids.
Right.
Our rings. We're going to put
Sorry,
these...
Mr. Hatim, you are muted. We cannot hear you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shannon. I'm sure it will be very delicious. And hi to your daughter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hatim.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you. Take care. Wa alaikum salam.
So I've got my rings here. I'm putting my rings on.
We don't need to boil them, right? Just the lids.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then what we're going to do here is we're going to put our rings on. You don't want them too tight. And this is the part where we make them safe to sit on your shelf. So.
Excuse me, Madam Shannon.
So,
Yes.
Omar, welcome, Omar. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to ask, because I do it, the strawberry jam with my mother, we waiting for 24 hours before they close the strawberry jam. We do it, same you do it, but we boiling the cover and we make it 24 hours before we close the jam.
Okay. So there are a lot of historical practices in how to make jam. Generally speaking, well, not generally speaking, like as a rule, to be perfectly honest, as a rule, those various historical practices are not going to result in jam that is consistently safe over time. I always hear about people, well, my grandmother did this way for years and years and years, and there was never a problem. Okay, great. If you want to be certain, if you want to be absolutely certain that your jars are going to be safe and that no toxins are going to occur in your jars and everyone is going to be healthy eating them a year, 2 months, 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, 6 months, a year from now, you need to follow modern safe canning practices. And that basically means exactly what I'm showing you here, and only with a tested recipe. And actually, I'm going to interrupt myself because part of safe canning is that you don't want to let these sit too long before you put them in boiling water.
Okay, so
I'm
we
going
will
to pick these up.
yeah. We will save the questions
so
till we finish. Right. We'll save the questions.
I'm going to come back to it. So
okay.
I'm going to set these into my boiling water. I'm using my little jar lifter here. Use tongs. It's fine. And I want my jars to be, Abby, can you get the camera so you can sort of see here? I want my jars to be not touching the sides, and I want them not touching each other. So you can sort of see what they look like in here. They're sitting on the silicone flour. They're not touching the sides, they're not touching each other, and they are covered in water.
Okay, so they're maintaining the social distancing.
Yes, you want your jars to be socially distanced. Yes. And so what we're going to do at this point, you want them to be covered all the way with water. You want about an inch of water. I don't even know what that is in centimeters. A thumb. You want a thumb of water.
Okay.
I'm like, so you want about a thumb joint of water over covering for the top of your lids.
Like the tip of my thumb.
Yeah, okay. And Abs, can you get onto this? And then what you want is bring your pot of water with your jam in it back up to a full boil. You need it to be completely boiling hard boil. So I'm going to put my lid on here, and I've got my temperature turned up. And when that comes up to a full 100% hard boil, I'll bring the camera back over and I'll show you what it looks like. That's when I'm going to start my timer. Every recipe is going to give you a processing time. That is how long the jars need to stay in that boiling water. So we have now washed our jars in hot soapy water. We've kept them in hot, simmering, boiling water to keep them sterile. We have cooked our jam up to 104 degrees Celsius. We have put our jam directly into our hot sterilized jars. We have put hot sterilized lids on top. Everything we we can to make certain that we have not introduced any bacteria into this food
Process.
that we have now put into these jars. So now what we want to do is, okay, here we go. We're back up to a hot 100% boil. So I'm going to pull this out so I can show you what that looks like. I mean, everybody knows what a boiling pot looks like, but there you go. Going crazy over there. So now I can set my timer for 10 minutes. And that is, time on this recipe says 10 minutes. So that's what we're going to do. And the whole time, that pot needs to stay boiling.
Right.
And that is the time necessary of keeping that food at that increased temperature to make sure that we kill absolutely everything that could make us inside that jar.
Right.
So, getting back to what I was saying about historical canning practices. So, historically, there are different kinds of lids that seal in a different way that are no longer marketed, but you can still sometimes find them. There's historical practices of where you just put the jam into the jars and then you turn the jars upside down. I literally don't even know exactly what the process looks like because it's not safe. So I don't need to know how to do it. I have heard about people trying to do it in the oven. Like I've heard a bunch of different, kind of, this is how my grandmother did it. Options. The only option that I feel safe telling anyone to use is this method of water bath canning, following a tested recipe, and that's it. This is a process you can use to preserve high acid foods, high acid recipes. You can use this for fruits. You can use this for pickles. You cannot use this for vegetables, meats, dairy products. It is possible to put those kinds of food into jars at home, but it requires the use of a pressure cooker to reach a much higher temperature than you do with boiling water. It's a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit more dangerous. When I'm doing that, I don't let my kids anywhere near the kitchen because there's always a small possibility that something's going to explode, literally. The simplest, easiest way to just sort of get into the hobby is with this process. You don't need any special tools that you can't buy at Sacco. Regular old cooking pot that you already have, one of these little trivets, and the jars. So, like I said, this recipe is from a cookbook written by an author who teaches canning and uses safe canning practices. And I put her website in the chat. I'm also going to. There's also, oh, here, let me actually type in the chat here. Is also freshpreserving.com is a good source for recipes. The company that makes the jars, they're called.
Everything is safe?
It's fine. I just pulled a cookbook off the shelf and everything fell. It's no problem. Abby, would you grab my shoes so that I'm not walking around? Yeah. Anyway, it's
something
fine.
broke. There's something broke.
It's no big deal. I just knocked something off my shelf and it broke. It really isn't. At any rate, the company that makes the jars is called Ball. They're called Ball jars. And they produce a cookbook called the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving. There's also the Ball Blue Book. Those are kind of tried and true, very common sources for recipes. And I believe it's the Ball company that runs freshpreserving.com, as I recall correctly. So yeah, there's a lot of different sources for recipes. It's really just a matter of making sure that the recipe that you're using says something about coming from the Ball website, coming from the Fresh Preserving website. There's also a British Fresh Preserving. It's freshpreserving.co.uk that has somewhat different recipes than the American website. And a lot of these recipe sources, kind of basic recipe. So I think someone was asking earlier about you having a basic recipe for different fruits. A lot of these websites will have a basic recipe and then they'll give you some variations on it. I taught a class on how to make jam to the American Embassy community, and I made a strawberry jam. And then I said, here's the different things you can change in this recipe. It's still safe, but you can kind of mix it up a little and make it your own. And again, that is just when you are looking for a recipe, you want to find something that has, a couple of different options. This particular recipe only uses the fruit and the sugars.
The lemon.
There are many, many recipes that call for something called pectin. Pectin comes in a couple of different forms. It is a white or beige powder.
Okay.
It is a thickener they make it out of apples, actually.
Oh.
It is a thickener for fruits that don't naturally want to thicken on their own. I have not seen pectin for sale anywhere here in Riyadh, but again, you can order it online. And then you have different options. You have classic pectin.
You can find it, the pectin, in Tamimi or Lulu hypermarket.
Excellent.
Okay. Thank you, Omar.
Thank you. Now I don't have to order it online. That's great. I'm really excited.
Yeah, because for me, I didn't use the pectin. We use the white. We use lemon.
Yeah. And like, for example, this jar of pectin that I'm holding here, if I peel the label back, it has a whole recipes just on the inside of the label.
Okay.
Yeah. That is true of quite a few different kinds of pectin. This one is called classic pectin. It usually is for a very high sugar recipe. They also make low sugar pectin. The chemistry is slightly different. Again, if I peel this label back, there's going to be recipes. There is another pectin that also uses really, really low sugar. It's called Pomona's. And again, it comes with a little, that box doesn't have it, but.
Recipe thing.
Like sachets or?
If I open the box, I pull out, it has a whole recipe.
Oh, okay.
Or this one's got jam, it's got jelly, different kinds of fruit, a whole bunch of different kinds of fruit, and that's just part of the box. So there's a lot of places we can find safe and tested recipes to use. As I sort of started out talking about, the historical process of canning, and it was developed as a way for people to preserve their homegrown produce over the winter, as a way to keep your extra fruit for when it was out of season. But as with any sort of practical skill, eventually it became a very hobby and an art form. And when things that start out as practical become a hobby and an art form, eventually you end up with competitions to see who's the best. So back in the United States, there's kind of a very well-known phenomenon. I don't even know how to describe it. There's a well-known event, happens across the United States, usually in very rural areas, called the county fair. And the county fair is usually, like I said, in rural, sort of agricultural focused areas of the country, where your local, your county, your local, smaller than a province, but your local government entity comes together with members of the community and puts on this event. And I'm going to pause in my description of a county fair because my timer has gone off and my jars are now processed. So I can take my lid off and turn off my heat. At this point, I'm going to leave the jars in there just until the pot stops boiling. It just makes it a little bit safer for me trying to reach over there with my lifter and not sticking my hand into the steam. It also helps to prevent a phenomenon called siphoning. The way that this seal has occurred is as this is boiling, the air, that air that was left at the top of the jars, it's called the headspace. The air that was left at the top of the jars is sucked out and a vacuum is formed. And these lids have a button in the middle.
Yeah.
And when the seal is sealed, the button automatically just goes and gets pushed down. And that's how you know you've got a good seal. Because that air is being sucked out of the jars, it can, particularly if you have too much food in the jar, suck out a little bit of that juice as well. That can give you a bad seal. It's also really messy. I'm told that letting the jars cool down just a little bit still in the water can prevent that from happening. And so I do what I'm told, essentially. So now that we have, let the jars, the pot is no longer boiling. It's just hot water now. It's not bubbling all over the place. I'm going to, real quick here, try to sort of clean up my mess that I would usually clean up while my jars are processing, but I was having such a great time talking to you lovely people. And then I'm going to take my jars out. So, and what I'm going to do is, I am going to set my jars on a cutting board. You can also set them on a towel. If you have a little drying mat, that works too. In this case, I just don't want to set them directly on the counter because my counter is not heat safe and I don't want to damage my counter because
It's not my
that would be bad. So again, I'm going to use my handy dandy jar lifter. You can also use tongs. And I'm going to take my little jars out and set them right here on my cutting board. You may or may not be able to hear it, but the lids are going pop, ping.
Okay.
And that is that little button getting sucked down
Sucked.
and the seal forming.
Hey, it made the same noise.
So I think you can, let me make sure you can see this, but in the jar, in the pot, I did not want my jars to touch. Now I do want my jars to touch, so they're just barely touching each other. And there went another one. I'm going to cover them with this dish towel, and that's just so they cool down slowly Again, this is really more of an issue if I was putting food into jars in the winter in a cold kitchen in the United States, as opposed to in April in Riyadh, where I'm not really all that concerned about things being too cold. But I want things to sort of cool down evenly and slowly. And as they cool, those lids are going to skip in. Those lids are going to get sucked in, and it's going to form a seal. And I have a jar of a different recipe, but I'll show you. When it's sealed, I can hold the jar by just the edge of that lid, and it's not going to drop, and I know that it's formed a good seal. You'll notice that this jar does not have the little ring on it.
The ring, yeah.
That is because if something went wrong, if bacteria got in here and starts to eat sugar and start to create toxins, it could create gases that will pop this lid off, and it will no longer be sealed. It may not be visible and it may not taste like anything, but it might be actually deadly. And the only way I'm going to know is if I go to my shelf and I go to pick this up and the seal fails. However, if I store it with the ring on, it's not going to fail because I have the ring.
You won't know. Yeah, you won't know.
So you leave your rings on while they're cooling down overnight. The next day, tomorrow morning, I'm going to take the rings off and I'm going to go put them on my shelf, and we'll have some awesome blueberry jam to eat.
Good thing too, because we just ran out of jam today.
And apparently that's a good thing too, because we just ran out of jam, says my.
Yeah.
So that's essentially the whole process for making jam from start to finish. But finish what I was saying about the county fair. So a county fair in the United States is a community comes together, usually a rural agricultural community. Some urban areas still have them, but it's typically a rural agricultural tradition. And they will have contests for different traditional sort of
Things.
Different traditional practices, arts. They'll typically have contests for who has the best looking cow, who has the best looking sheep. The kids from the area will bring in their baby goats that they raised. And there'll be prizes for the best baby goats and livestock. She wants a baby goat.
Cute.
And then there's also going to be competitions for sewing and baking and crafts and artwork. And one of the competitions is usually preserving jams, jellies, fruit butters, whole fruit in syrup. There's typically 10 to 20 different categories, depending on how that fair has it set up. And
we spent like hours making jam for the
yes.
fair.
So when I lived back in the United States, I loved to enter every category I could possibly come up with there. And when you enter these contests, you get prizes, you get ribbons. A yellow ribbon is third place, and a red ribbon is second place, and a blue ribbon is first place, and that means yours was the absolute best jam in that category out of the whole county. I have more blue ones than any other color.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That's just sort of like it's almost, and as far as I know, it is almost a uniquely American kind of tradition to have this local traditional agricultural community event where you have these competitions, people, this is it. This is the only prize. There's no money in it.
Just the ribbon.
It's the ribbon. It's I get the ribbon and I get to, you know, be better than all the
And
other
be
women
famous.
who made. Yeah, I get to feel good about myself and I get to brag and I get to tell how great it is.
Self-esteem rises through the roof.
And then, you know, once all the competitions are over, there's usually amusement park rides. And I mean, at our county fair, there was a camel ride, which was super awesome.
In our county
And all the
fair,
kids thought it was really great and exciting.
in our county fair, there was a Lego contest, and the year that you told me that, I'm like, I want to enter next year. And then the last few years we didn't enter, and I'm like,
Yes.
dang it.
Yes, and so now modern county fairs sometimes will have contests like Lego building and I can't even think of some of the like more modern Lego building. Computer generated art might be part of one of the contests.
Digital art.
Digital art, yeah.
Last year, just before COVID, we used to have the Farmers' Day on Saturdays on in front of Oud Square in the DQ. And some people, they used to bring their small goats and sheep and yeah.
Everybody's been telling me about that, and I'm really sad that I wasn't here for it.
Yeah,
and I hope
we missed that this year. Yeah.
I want baby goats.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Shannon. So would you like
My
to have
daughter is
some?
really fired up now about getting a baby goat. If anybody has any questions or, like I said, I tried to pick a recipe that I knew was ingredients that we could store. Some of the better and again, it's sort of, you usually use a lot of fruit to make a few jars. So with the really expensive fruits, it probably isn't necessarily worth it. Around here, I make a lot of stuff with apricots.
Mango?
Yeah, there are recipes for mango. There are, yeah, and as I said, you can use frozen fruit. And I have a whole shelf full of different cookbooks and options and
So many books.
just about all kinds of things that you can think of, and you can do fruit, you can do some savory things, you can do chutneys, you can do things with onions.
Thank you very much, Shannon. So if anyone has any question, see Omar is raised his hand. Yes, Omar.
Yeah, I want to ask Madam Shannon, if I want after I boiling, just I put it inside and cooling it down within 24 hours, or use it directly.
So once this jam that has been through the boiling water process cools down, I can put it on my shelf and it'll be good for, it'll taste fantastic for a year. Up to about 2 years, it's probably still safe, but it's not going to be as nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. But I ask about when I put, because with my mom, we put the strawberry jam after we fill it. We put it inside after we boiling and everything. We put it on the side for 1 day. Usually we put it night and we use it next day. That's what I ask about.
So you're asking Omar if you can use it the next morning or the next day?
No. There is any procedures to speed up?
To speed up.
To speed up what, Omar?
when I fill the strawberry, because me
Okay.
and with my mom,
Mhm.
we fill the strawberry we fill the strawberry jam. After
Right.
that, when we close it, we put it for 24 hours before we use it.
Okay.
Okay.
So you you want to know if you can use it before the 24 hours?
Yeah, no, you want to
for-
let it sit for at least the 24 hours so that it starts to thicken. Because right now it's real thin. I've got sort of some left on the stove here, and it's almost like a pomegranate molasses kind of
Mhm.
level of thickness.
Yeah.
As it sits in the jar for 24 hours, it's going to thicken up and it's going to become more spreadable.
Spreadable.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes,
Hello, I have a question.
Please, Lamia.
Shannon, thank you so much for all this presentation. It was amazing seeing your kitchen and feel that we are actually sitting there. My question is actually when you mentioned that we have to put the jars inside the boiling pot, I was concerning about the water. Like, do you really cover it all over with the water, or actually the water only reach the edges of the jars?
No, the jar needs to be fully submerged in the water. So that's actually part of the reason I used the little jars today, because I didn't want to fill up my giant tall pot.
Right.
So if you want to be able to process jars that are taller, you need to have a taller pot. It doesn't have to be like a canner. It can just be a tall soup pot. But it does need to be a taller pot. I've heard of something called an asparagus pot that people use, that is smaller around but very tall. People will use to make, one or two jars. Again, just to, a little bit of produce left over that you need to do something with before it goes bad.
Right.
Yeah, you
My
need to
concern
have the
actually,
jar completely submerged in the water.
yeah, Shannon, my concern actually is like a small drop of water, because I'm not sure, like I'm not sure if you explained that and I missed it. When we get these jars out, I'm not sure, like, do we dry it off before we add the jam, or like we can just pour the jam directly, even if there is a small drop of water?
Okay. Yes, you can put the jam, you can do either one. You can dry it off, or you can put the jam in if there's still a little bit of water in the jar. The water has been boiling, and in my instance, I filled my pot with water from my drinking water cooler.
Right. The sterilization.
If you don't want to do that, you can dry it out. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not concerned about sterilization as much as about the portions of a water on the jam. Is it going to affect the flavor, or is it going to affect the proportions of the sugar and the fruit on the same time? That was actually my concern.
Yeah. No,
awesome.
that small amount of water isn't going to make that kind of much of a difference.
Right. Thank you.
It's not. It's precise, but it's not that precise.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lamia. Any other question? So I think that's a no. Shannon, thank you very much. That's been awesome session. We learned a lot, and we would love to have you again with us and with another recipes for sure. And if you find any recipe about dates jam, that would be awesome, because the date season is coming soon, and now we're having dates all over. So
I'm still looking. I'm looking through every resource I can find, and if as soon as I find one,
we'll make another session. Thank you very much, Shannon. Thank you very much, our friends, and see you next week on our next virtual Diwania. and on Saturday for our reading book. Thank you and have a good night.
Great session, Shannon. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you, Coach Saleh.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Omar.
much. Bye bye.
Appreciate it. Thank you.